Hey everybody, welcome to Pealed Back's LiveCast Conversations with, as always, I'm your host, Gene the Enjoyment Coach, and this is episode 69. On this episode, my friend Kate Huckabay is our guest today. Kate spent more than a decade partnering with senior leaders in academia to execute and implement university initiatives focused on leveraging employee strengths, creating value for students, faculty, and staff, and innovating internal processes. As a senior consultant and How Activator, she engages with executive teams across many industries to take ownership, create clarity, and drive alignment to define the way of leadership. She's currently getting certified as a certified professional coactive coach from the Coactive Training Institute, and she's slated to complete that in 2022. Kate, welcome so much to the show.
Hi, thank you so much, Gene. So happy to be here.
Well, we're very happy to have you here and to get into it. So, a lot of things that you've been up to and that you're doing. Let's talk a little bit about your journey. Like, how did you get down this path of leadership development and being a senior consultant?
Yeah, thanks for asking. It's been a circuitous route, as most people have it. I am from a really small town in southern Colorado, and I grew up on the Southern Ute Indian Reservation. So I went from kindergarten to 12th grade on the reservation, and the community was tri-ethnic. So it was a third Latinx, a third Southern Ute, and a third white. And I feel like that gave me a really amazing foundation as a child. And I bring that up. I'll tie it back to why I'm bringing that up later. And I went to college in Boulder and studied communication. And so I was really interested in how people talk to each other, not communications like the journalism media, but more communication. And then, wanted to kind of live a bunch of different places, get out of Colorado, lived in New Orleans for a year, came back to Colorado a little bit, moved to New York City, lived in New York for about 5 years. And during all that time, had jobs in universities. So I reported to senior leaders, partnering with senior leaders at universities, doing that kind of chief of staff, special projects type of roles, a lot of event coordinating and that type of thing. And got a master's degree in higher ed administration from NYU, did some traveling as well, got to spend, before I moved to New York, quit my job and traveled in Asia for 3 months. I got to spend a month in China and 2 months around Southeast Asia. And then as part of a program through NYU, got to travel to India and Israel. So really so much gratitude for my opportunities to get to see the world. And
you've been through a lot of different cultural centers then.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. And with lots of different humans. And I'm so grateful for that. And then decided to, I was got married at that time and had a baby in New York. Felt like New York was just too much to raise a family in from growing up in Colorado. So moved back to Colorado and got to be a stay-at-home mom during that time, which was also a real privilege. And had another child. So I have 2 daughters. And really was starting, this was kind of in my early 30s, started to go through a really, I don't know, I like to call it my dark night of the soul. Like I was not in a good place, sort of feeling like I was not living a fulfilling life in the way that I wanted to, and the way that I felt I could. And so really dug into personal growth. And so got divorced during that time and started seeking out other opportunities. And so this whole time I'd also been doing a lot of social justice work and, having that experience as growing up in more of the minority position, I think was beneficial to me. And so was doing a lot of social justice work. I work with an organization that uses theater to talk about social justice. And so got to use my acting skills that I had honed, in high school. And in the university system had the opportunity to lead a group called the Anschutz Inclusivity Alliance. Anschutz is the name of the medical school here in Colorado. And we put on a bunch of really amazing programs. We got funding from the chancellor and felt so excited about that work, but was having a hard time making that my day job. And so got an opportunity to work with my current company, Carrickens Group, and we're a boutique consulting company based out of Denver. And we work with executive teams on how to lead together better. but that transition into becoming a consultant, was challenging, and it was a big shift, and it kind of very different from working in higher education. And also during that time, after I'd gotten divorced, I was dating another guy for about 3 years, and he was killed in a motorcycle accident 3 years ago. And that was a really awful experience, as you can imagine. And I, kind of think about it, that it broke my heart open. I had really a big shift in how I wanted to show up in the world, a very deep sense that tomorrow is not promised, and that I want to make the most out of today. And really got into mindfulness. Eckhart Tolle is somebody who's really inspired me, and kind of really dug into my spiritual life there as well, and did a lot of personal growth workshops through an organization called PSI Seminars, stands for Personal Success Institute. And they, similar to Landmark, if you've heard of Landmark.
Okay, yeah.
And did all of their workshops. And so this really complements all the work I do with leaders, is what I'm trying to get to, because I've done a lot of my own work, and part of having quality conversations with folks is starting with self. And so having that self-awareness to recognize how our mindsets that we bring into conversations, whether or not we choose to start with curiosity, that really impacts the conversations that we have. And getting to practice having we like to call them at Carrigan's Group quality conversations versus hard conversations, or difficult conversations, more in that quality space. That quality doesn't mean it has to be good and there's rainbows and ponies, but that it's quality and that people are being heard and seen. And
so the quality comes from like stripping out the good or bad from it. It is like, here's the things that we need that are important to talk about, that need to have the light shone on them.
Yes, that's exactly right. Absolutely. And that's hard. That's really hard to bring up the group dynamics that maybe are, blocking us from executing on whatever it is we're trying to execute on, or, giving folks feedback. We like to say, feedback is a gift, but not everybody receives feedback as a gift.
You mean feedback isn't always just this horrible criticism that makes you want to crawl under the desk and cry a little bit? Or maybe that's just me.
Right, exactly. No, yeah. So I think there's been a lot of that comes from that self-awareness piece. And so I'm really passionate about that piece for myself, and like, how do I constantly challenge myself and grow myself to become more and more self-aware about what energy I'm bringing to situations, or what energy how I'm interacting with folks. So the long story to wrap it up is that through a networking, I got this job with Carrigan's Group. I've started as a specialist and have worked my way. I'm now on the leadership team, and just have this opportunity to become a coach, as you know. That's how I've met you. And it's just, I'm so amazed at how much abundance has happened to me in my life, and appreciate the dark night of the souls and the grieving process to remind me every day to show up in this way, to be really full of gratitude.
Like when you talked about that dark night, is like you said, it broke your heart open, where some may describe that as like the shattering of the heart, but it was like, felt the way that you spoke about it was just like this opportunity to like break a shell off of it. Now it's fully open in one piece. Yeah,
I love that. The idea of like the breaking of the shell. I think it felt like that. Like there had been some unconscious barriers even around, even the heart space that got broken in a good way.
Yeah. And now leading from this place of curiosity, it's interesting to hear the way that you talk about awareness, and like you started it around having those curious conversations, which led to, or leading with curiosity led to quality conversations, which wraps around awareness. Now I'm curious about, what's your opinion on, is it curiosity or is it awareness? Or are they kind of like, are they one and the same?
Yeah, now that you were saying that, I'm thinking that you want to have the awareness about being curious to be curious. So maybe I'd say that you need both.
Yeah, so it's like that chicken and the egg, is like, were you curious about your awareness, which then brought awareness to your curiosity, or were you awareness about the curiosity, then that brought more awareness?
Yeah, I don't know. There was a lot of words right there.
It
But
was
yeah,
really just two, and I just interchanged.
I know, right? Exactly. I've got a bit lost in the flow. Yeah, I think for me personally, I was curious about my awareness. So, to the other point, if you want to be more curious, have awareness that you want to be curious.
Yeah.
But the awareness piece really, I also am grateful for very progressive parents, and so my parents are um, rule breakers, and in this sense, my dad's a cowboy and my mom is a hippie, and so I grew up without a TV and going to Native American ceremony, and how, now that I'm an adult, have appreciation for those unique experiences that that they're unique. I think I grew up as like, well, this is what do you mean? Of course you do this, what everybody does. And yeah, just a gratitude, a shout out to my parents for being really open-minded.
That's awesome. That's a great shout out to have, to understand now, looking back on all that experience, seeing where it's led you, and maybe that's like part of that, like getting to go explore, just adding to this curiosity that comes from within you.
Yeah, I agree. It's a are you familiar with the Strengths Finder assessment?
Yeah, I am. I haven't.
Okay.
I haven't taken it, but I'm very familiar with it.
Okay. So I had formerly thought of what are now my strengths, which I'll share, as like they were bad things, that they were weaknesses. And so the curiosity piece I'm connecting to is around I love meeting new people and asking them questions and getting to know them, and I feel very comfortable in that space, and not around small talk, but like I want to know about you, like I'm really curious about you as a human. And I got some feedback in, say like high school, where people were like, you're so nosy, and why are you asking so many questions, and don't do that. And I thought, oh, okay, like this is a bad thing. And then I took Strengths Finder, and one of my strengths is woo, which stands for winning others over. And it's that space around being comfortable meeting new people, and liking having new friends, and liking making more connections. And so now that now that I recognize that as a strength, I'm like, well, no wonder I'm so curious. Like that's just a natural part of me. That is a strength that I'm leveraging when I'm being curious.
That's very cool. Like immediately in my mind, I'm like, we just redefined what a woo girl is. It's winning others over, which is great. What was it like when you originally read the woo? Like, did it take you a minute to sit with that and to like go, well, this has been like a bad thing, or this is like this thing I'm trying to hide? What was it like seeing it on that report and then working through it to go, oh, this is one of my superpowers that I've been hiding behind my back?
Yeah, I think that exactly how you just described it. It was a very affirming experience to read the report and say, oh, this is considered a strength. And it's one of them, there's a list of 34 strengths in that assessment. And it's one of their, rarer ones. And it was just really affirming to be able to give it language and say, this is a strength. So I think the shadow, that you were kind of alluding to, that shadow side, right? Of like how our saboteurs, as we like to talk about, where those show up. And I think for me that it showed up in the, like, I'm not enough. Like I need to try really hard, and I need to win people over, and I need to do it a certain way, and the way I'm doing it isn't enough. And so I've worked hard I practice. I like to use the word practice versus work. I really practice asking my saboteur to sit down and be quiet and trust that I am enough. And that if my style doesn't resonate with everybody, that's okay too. Like in that space of like full acceptance.
So where that comes, like the metaphor, the imagery that brings up is like you have this power, and because when it's untrained and unpracticed, it just kind of shoots everywhere. And sometimes it's hitting good things, and other times it's destroying buildings. It's like you're a superhero learning for the first time that you've got this incredible gift. And then over time, you've learned to hone it so that you can use it for the good. And you also know the power that it can unleash if it's used if it's carelessly used or like not paid attention to properly.
Yeah, exactly. I think what's coming up for me is that the wanting to win people over for staying in that strength space was coming from a place of scarcity and lack, right? That it was like, I felt like, oh, I want people to like me. I want their approval versus I'm really curious about you and I want to know your story and it has nothing to do with me. That I think I've definitely been practicing that shift using that strength to what you're just saying.
Yeah, it talks about, like we were talking about before we started the show, is like it comes from that place of service where it's just like, I want to know about you. Like, this isn't about, I'm curious and that's what's filling my bucket, but tell me about you. I don't care about the weather. I don't care about your job. I want to hear about you and what's happening for you right now and going forward.
Yeah, very much that idea. And I really like what you're pointing out around like powerful questions, right? It isn't about the weather. And and it's like there's an art certainly to asking folks personal questions that encourage them or invite them into exploring versus feeling defensive or like somebody's trying to pry. And so I'm also practicing that too. Like, how do I ask powerful questions in a way that makes people still feel safe and still makes them feel like they're and then not being judged, right? There's a piece around question asking that can feel judgy sometimes.
Yeah.
However, the way it's worded, I suppose.
It's interesting you bring that up because like a term that's been brought up, because so we're both going through Coactive, just both finished our synergy course. So like one term somebody brought up in mine was like talking about making a brave space for that weekend. Right. So knowing that this isn't a place of judgment, but this is a place of potential discomfort, and it's okay to explore that and to get into it and to open it up to those conversations. And just knowing that if we have a situation where there's what we call an ouch oops, where it's just like, oh, ouch, and then you can still say oops and still move forward and get into the discomfort of what came up there. That's where like some real beautiful questions can really come out of.
Yeah, I like that idea around brave because it reminds me of courage, right? And this idea of like it takes courage to be in that space and to admit when something landed wrong and try again. But yeah, I like that framing around brave.
Yeah, it's something that's just totally sat with me, and I'm definitely pulling that forward for the rest of the time, right? And that's what this is all about. This is meant to be like a brave space to get into it and mix it up a little bit and ask those questions about like what is actually important about all of that for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you asking me?
Well, I think I am now. So what is important to you about all
that? Part of my journey too has been around my identity as a white woman and an educated, middle class, able-bodied, neurotypical, cisgender white woman. That there's a lot of spaces that I get to show up in that and that I feel comfortable and safe in, and recognizing that not everybody has those, that not everybody gets to show up in every space and feel good and comfortable and seen and heard. And that that's been a journey for me to come to terms with my privilege and then use that privilege for good. And I think initially when I was in college, I read an article called it's by now I'm completely spacing on the name, but Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack Around White Privilege. And it made me feel initially like really guilty and like sad. And I didn't know what to do with that. And I was like, well, this is not productive. Like being in this sad, guilty space isn't helping me show up better in the world. And so I, reframing that into, wow, I have so much privilege. What can I do with that? And I can be an advocate. I can be an ally. I can talk to other white people about being white, because it's not something in my experience that white people talk a lot about necessarily, unless they're really in social justice work. And so the brave space, to tie it back to your question around what does it mean to be in a brave space or a safe space, is to do a lot more listening and a lot less talking, and ask questions, right, that are genuinely curious, and recognize that I don't know what somebody else's experience is, even if they're another white woman, right? We all have different experiences. And so treating everybody as individuals, I think, has been a big part of that for me. And then making sure that I have a lot of personal relationships with a lot of different people, that I intentionally make sure that my community are folks that don't just look and act like me, that, that I am really intentional about that piece of it.
Right. Yeah, it's you sounds like you've added intentionally this diversity of perspectives all the way around you, so that you can have more of that fuller viewpoint about what's going on in the world. Like I truly think like each of our perspectives and the gifts that we get to bring is within our distinctions of living through it, right? Because I could have a twin brother and we would be totally gone through totally two different sets of distinctions on getting to where we are today. And that if that's the case, then that the delta and the shift between just the two of us and then everybody else that's watching, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger. And then accepting that that's kind of like that beautiful part about it, is like that's where we get to sit and understand. We get to ask some questions within it to appreciate that distinction, that we aren't all the same. And you know what, I think that's a great piece, that we aren't the same.
Yeah, I really love that. There's a book by a woman who I had the privilege to work with at the university, by Dr. Brenda Allen, called Difference Matters. And that, exactly to your point, that's where the beauty lies, in all of our differences.
And so is that kind of like what drew you? Because like I found it interesting to hear some more about what you've been doing with like doing like the acting and talking to it, and how that has like, where's that allowed you to explore and like share some understanding?
Yeah, that's a great question. The theaters, the way that we use theater is that we have a scene that's a accessible scene to whatever our audience is. So, for example, I was just did a performance 2 weeks ago at a healthcare institution talking about gender identity. And so the scene was that we're three providers, we're three physicians, and one person's identifies as trans, and the other person doesn't even want to share their pronouns when they're talking to patients. And my character was kind of in between. I was like, well, let's just get our case study done. Like I had that kind of like, let's just do the work, and it was uncomfortable, right? And so and then the piece of the theater is that we have an empty chair, and so you as an audience member can see like, well, if I was there, what would I do? And not as a character, but like, what would you actually do in that scenario? Would you ask everybody to introduce themselves with their pronouns? Would you try to keep the conversation going because it was uncomfortable for you? You know, what would you do? And so you get to come in, and we call like rehearsal for real life. And so to get to practice having those quality conversations in a safe space that's a theater space. And so that when you are in real life and these conversations come up, what can you do about, how would you maybe respond differently? And I'm completely lost my train of thought now of what you originally asked me about the acting. Sorry.
Oh, just like how you're using it to like display, like I guess maybe put that spotlight on how to look at the understanding from a different way, being able to step into some, maybe those characters, and what it's taught you from going into those and putting on that, that other role, and having to embrace it. And what does that unlock for understanding?
Yes. Awesome. Thank you. I think that for me, I've been able to, well, I'm getting to do rehearsal for real life. So that's really helpful for me. And I get to see how other people do it. So I think learning from other people and seeing how other people respond to those situations has been helpful. The characters that I've played aren't necessarily ones I would want people to see me in real life. So that like getting to let go of my ego and say, well, I'm doing this in service to the audience and for this work. It doesn't, it's not about me, has been a part of unlocking my learning. And all of these like we do a lot of work with in higher ed too, like with college students. And so seeing to the difference in generations around how generationally people respond to these topics is really heartwarming, actually, because I've been doing this work for about 20 years, and the organization is called Affinity Arts Consulting, working with them since I was in college. There's been a big shift generationally around social justice work, and that's so gratifying, and hope. I've been like, oh, there's hope in the world. So yeah, I'm not sure if I quite answered your question, but a lot of learning has been unlocked for me.
That you bottom lined it beautifully right there. Well, one of the things that you mentioned about like putting on those different roles and like having the ego dropped and maybe not wanting to have, where you wouldn't be able to do that, where you feel like in your, we'll call it your normal life, your day to day. How has putting on those roles affected how you now show up in your day to day?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'm having a lot more awareness, to use that word again, that other people have very different experiences than I do, and to keep that open-minded perspective about recognizing everybody's different layers of identity and how that shows up. And I'm thinking specifically about like the senior leaders I get to work with Karakin's group, how they care so much, like seeing them as leaders who care so much about their business and about their employees. And I guess it's just giving me a really big appreciation for assuming positive intent, that most folks out in the world are showing up because they care and they want the world to be a better place. And if I assume that, if I already come into the engagement or the interaction assuming that they're coming from that place of goodness and abundance versus scarcity, they are. I guess that's what I've learned. Like, people do show up from most often people are showing up from a place of wanting the world to be better.
Right. And then by opening that spot from your own perspective, it just allows them to step into that within that moment with you.
Yeah. And at least maybe for me to take it personally, if it doesn't, quite go that way, I'm like, okay, well, it's probably not personal.
Yeah. Well, and there's so many like adages around like how somebody responds to you says more about them than it does about you, right? So it's just like the power is in that response in that moment. We're all going to have a reaction, right? Like those reactions happen within microseconds or faster than that. Our subconscious, as you know, is a wonderful thing, and it shoots these things up. You're like, whoa, what just happened here? I don't know if I like this, but it's still within our ability to learn. I think that awareness is that space between that reaction and that response going, okay, like maybe that this isn't about me right now, and I can stop and ask a curious question versus like launch off and going, how dare they, because it doesn't match some expectation I may have upon myself.
Yeah, I agree. And I really like, so you actually shared this in a previous episode that you did around taking time to feel disappointed, or taking time to feel like your anger, and that you put a time box on it. I think you were sharing it was something around like, I get 5 minutes to feel whatever my big feelings are, in maybe, like to your point, reaction versus response, and to give ourselves that space to be frustrated, for lack of a better word, and then move on. I really liked that you shared that, because I think that that's part of it too, is like all of our feelings are valid. And if we give them each a voice and space to show up however they are, and time box it and move on, we can show up in it. We can respond then differently.
And I think that ties it right back to like we were talking about doing the acting component of it. Is like it gave you those opportunities to practice what it was like to be on that side, and still practicing, like, even though you're playing this role, I guarantee there was some part of you like reacting to it as like watching it from the observer standpoint, going, oh, I get to practice this right now, right? And like that time, but like where I see this being even more refined is like, it's your practice time. Like any athlete, like we were talking about your power of woo, like you needed to practice and hone it. And it's the same thing with having those reactions, and having that time box is like, all right, this is practice time. What do we got in here? We got anger, we got frustration, we got fear. Cool, practice, play it. Be like, good. So when you show up, I know how you feel, and I'm not going to let you run the show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I really like that. And I love that we're using the word practice. I think people often like, well, I'm trying to do this or I'm working toward this. And I think if we can reframe it as I'm practicing, that it gives us that space to be messy and then forgive ourselves and then try again. And we're not trying, like we're doing it. We don't need to say I'm trying. Like I'm actually engaging in this right now. And even like the working toward, I'm like, for me, that doesn't resonate because I just feel so strongly that every moment, I suppose, is an opportunity to practice.
I love that. And like through all that, it's just like, it's like Yoda screaming, there is no try, there's only do and do not, right? And having this idea of practice for like removing the word try or working towards, like maybe I'm going to take that as my own thing, because I use the word working towards quite often, but the reality is like that practice, what practice means to me versus try or working towards is like, it is that messy spot. Like if I'm in practice, I don't have to hit a home run, but I can keep practicing the little skills to get to it. Whatever metaphor works for you out there in listener land, but like it's like, what are those little skills that you're going to be okay to not necessarily get the outcome, but you're building up to it, and you're going to get messy, and you're going to try new stances and new approaches, and just get into it, just get muddy and dirty with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing that we talk about at Karakin's group that I love is we talk about nudges, not shoves. That it's like all of these little nudges over time, as opposed to like one big shove that comes in. How certainly there's a time for shoves, I suppose. But most often, if you're really wanting to create behavior change, it's a bunch of little nudges over time. And that that continues. There's no like end result on that. There's no like, oh, now we've done it, check. It's like, no, like continue to keep nudging ourselves forward. Is kind of what I was hearing too. And you're like that metaphor of practice.
Oh, 100%. I love that, where it's just like, it's it reminds me of people going, oh, you're an overnight success. But like, no, this was like 3 years of like daily nudges that all of a sudden got tall enough that you could see them over everything else. That's that difference. Is like success is compounded daily. And I think that came from the other last week's episode with Lisa, where she was sharing about like it's all about the daily successes that do compound over time. And the same thing with this concept of a nudge. Like somebody shoves you, what's your first reaction when you get shoved? Like you take a defensive stance and you're like, no, I'm not moving. And now we've got two people putting this energy together and nothing's happening. It's the same thing with fighting over all these things. It's like, how can we've got this energy, how can we actually use it so it's like actually flowing versus just like hammering into each other and canceling out?
Yeah, I really like that. I was thinking too, like if you got shoved, another thing that could happen is you fall over. And so then it's almost like you got to start all back over. You got to stand back up. You got to get yourself grounded again. And to your point, nothing happens from that space either, because you're like probably back in defensive mode and you're thinking, oh, that hurt or whatever it is that happened. But there's definitely the nudges work better.
It's like, what is it? Judo that uses the momentum of, with you, right? So how do you use that energy and that momentum of it versus like using it to cancel it out, right? If you get that shove, if you hit the ground, or even if you come to a halt, it's like, oh God, here we go. Now I got to get back going again. That's always hard. But like little nudges, like you might not feel it, but like over time, those little nudges make, like that's where the hockey stick action happens, right? And a big shove, like regardless, a big shove isn't maintainable. You can't sustain massive amounts of deploying of energy, because something's going to give, right? But those little shoves can stack up, and you can make the little tweaks and figure out what needs to stay and what needs to go in those little bits versus big swaths of it.
Yeah, I really like that too. And I'm like having this like visual as a poster that my kids have, but like what success really takes is what you were talking about, and how you see the tip of the iceberg and then like, wow, that's amazing. And then like this, the whole underneath the iceberg that was like failure and practice and time and, support from family and community and, more failure. But it's deceiving. It's deceiving to see, the very tip. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, no, I think I'm thinking about the same iceberg picture. It's like blue, and then there's like
Yes.
dark water underneath the big thing, all happening, and it's so true. And it's just like everything, like all that success takes time and consistency and dedication, and like that willingness to go, how are we going to get this thing above water?
Yeah. And then even to like tie it to back up at the beginning of our conversation, it also is like that awareness of how do I show up differently? How do I need to change my communication style? How do I need to shift my mindset that may be holding me back? How can I, choose to be curious? Like it really ultimately starts with self, from that place of, you can't change other people, right? You can only change yourself. And that's, so frustrating. I don't know, that can be frustrating too. Like, are you kidding me? I got to do all this work myself. I was like, yeah, actually, this is your self-work too.
That feels like almost a conversation that has to be in the mirror sometimes. Like, we're changing other people. Be like, what about you? Be like, oh God, no. Do you know how hard that is?
Yeah, right. Exactly. Oh yeah, no, breaking habits and creating new habits and consistency, it takes I think, it can be fun and exciting, and it takes an enormous amount of energy. Yeah.
And it's like all those things are true about it. Be like, it can be fun, it can be exciting, and it is a lot of energy. It's a lot of effort, and sometimes it can be hard work. And it's all of those things, and it's all worth it at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. Something else you shared on your episode last week with Lisa, and shout out to Lisa. That was awesome. I loved hearing her talk. Hearing your conversation rather. Was about being in the present moment. You shared this awesome story about like stopping your workout and like feeling the snow on you and hearing it wasn't snow, maybe it was rain, but hearing the sounds, and you just were there. And I think that for me is another piece that helps me continue to show up with some level of excitement for all of this hard self-work. Is the present moment is full of so much stuff, and when we can just genuinely be in it and not be in the past and in the future, there's an amazing amount of opportunity. It's been my experience with the present moment.
So, well, let's talk about the present moment. What is your ways that you bring the present back into it?
Yeah. One thing that I find very useful is to, and I think you talked about this too, but like having a practice of gratitude. So something that my partner and I like to say is, today is a new day, a golden day. And, like, thank you for this day. Like, just, in the mornings, be really present to, this is a new day. So there's a host of new opportunities and experiences to be had today. I think breath, obviously coming back to our breath, is a hugely helpful. That sounded funny. Anyway, that I find that to be very helpful. It's like, take some deep breaths. I think also when I have like cues where I start to loop, and I'm like get it really focused on something that either happened in the past or is happening in the future. I've been practicing catching myself in that loop, and I'm like, okay, wait a minute. Like, all I'm doing is like, I'm ruminating and I'm thinking and I'm planning, and I'm not here right now with what's happening. So that's been a cue for me. And then probably, going outside, like that's such an easy way to get present, is to feel the sun on your face and feel the wind and through your hair and feel your feet on the ground, and, just show up right now here in this moment. And it doesn't matter if you're outside in the woods or you're on the beach, or you're in a city. Like, you can still go outside and get connected back to nature ultimately. But yeah. What about for you? What are your practice techniques or present practices?
Present practices. Yeah. Well, I think breath is a big one. And I think breath is a big one. And I like your thing about catching the spinning thoughts, because that happens for me quite often. It would just be like the little solution engine just revs right up, and then it can go wildly off course as well. But like, just pulling that back and sitting with it a little bit, and taking a moment. Like, I try to do a morning meditation routine for the most part. And I find when I do that, I can catch myself easier in the day. I can bring it back. Another like hack that I use for myself is Spotify has these binaural beats.
Somebody was telling me about that recently.
It's not music. It's just like these beats that are supposed to do stuff with your brain waves. And I find I can, when I've got them on, I can get so like into what's happening in that time. Like if I need to like focus on something and I'm like, oh my God, okay, I'm spinning, or maybe I'm feeling like a little bit like squirrely, like all over the place. I'll turn that on. And it's just like this like cone of like, not even a cone of silence. It's just like I'm sitting in like in this energy bubble. I'm like, whoa, what can I do? Oh my Lord. It's just like everything can happen in the moment. I stop thinking and I just start being, right? Like, so it's like Tony Robbins saying, like, stop being a human doing and start being a human being. And like that for me is like a big switch.
Yeah.
And when that doesn't work, I use exercise to like tire my body out, and then I can try to do that as well, like or like leverage doing those types of things that'll bring the good feelings up, and then like hammer right into something that needs that focus.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and what you were saying about the binaural beats, so that I after my partner was killed, I saw a therapist who focuses on EMDR therapy. Have you heard of that?
I
It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and it's exactly what you're saying. So you're in this particular therapy that I did, I was holding two like plastic balls that were vibrating at a different frequency, and the bilateral movement, the frequencies moving from the left brain to the right brain create new neural pathways. And so you're probably, the reason you're able to focus is because you're getting new neural pathways going between the brain, between the brain hemispheres that in the case of trauma allow you to not have the same emotional trigger that you would have when you have that memory, because the new neuro pathway is done like in a therapy session, and so you know that you're safe, right? Like you're not being re-traumatized in that therapy session, but you've been able to create new neural pathways that allow you to show your emotional responses less, I guess. And but anyway, I'm kind of, obviously the science stuff I'm kind of messing up in the moment, but the binaural beats I've also heard that too, the same idea, and so how powerful that is.
Yeah, and like for me, like I'll do things like I usually have my like earbuds in, but I've got like headset cans. I'll put on like if it's like serious time to like get focused, like it just like I just try to change my environment just enough to slip into that. So it's, I don't know, I find that those little tweaks just kind of like go, okay, now it's time to focus. In the past as well, like I've sat with, when it's about time have a difficult conversation that I want to make it a quality one, I will sit and do a little bit of like ruminating about the future, but like kind of like pull myself out into this observer mode going, okay, what's the worst that's going to happen? Now we're going to sit back and watch the body have the chemical reaction to the emotion, because I believe emotion is just energy in motion. How can I capture that so I can be prepared for when it comes up, so that I can still be present with it, right? And I think there is I've had personal success by doing that practice as well. It allows me to like kind of almost get to a point where the wheels start spinning, and then kind of like third person it going, what's actually happening when the wheels are spinning? And it's like this like weird metacognition, like focus time too, right? But it also has allowed me to have some really quality conversations instead of difficult conversations. So it's those are just some of the things when I think about being present, what comes up.
Yeah, and just real quick on that, and something that I learned from Eckhart Tolle. I read a lot of his books, and it just really all his work resonates for me. Is that you aren't your thoughts, right? That observer piece, that you could pull yourself out and recognize, I'm not that. Like my essence, my beingness, my energy is not all of these looping thoughts and the tension around the conversation and the like all of these external events. That there's like that very grounded, solid piece of ourselves that we have access to.
Yeah, I know. And that's there's also Mind Hacking Happiness, I think, by Sean Webb, talks a lot about that too, right? It's just like that metacognition. It's like, well, if you can observe it, then they aren't you. They're just a thing that's you're experiencing. So it's just like, that's a whole conversation for another day, because that's going to be a head loop.
Awesome.
And remember, before we got started, I said I was going to look up. It's going to be 40 minutes. It's like 46 minutes. And I knew this conversation was going to go. It was going to be great. So let's give you an opportunity to give a shout out to where people can find you, anything else that is exciting going on before we hit that last question of the day.
All right. Thank you so much. Just a shout out to Kerrigan's Group. It's an amazing company. We work with teams on how to be in alignment, how to lead together better. We have a lot of other programming there around showing up as an aligned leader. And a big piece of that is being curious. So just a shout out to Kerrigan's Group, a shout out to Affinity Arts Consulting, an amazing organization using theater to talk about social justice. And finally, as part of the coaching program, I have my own coaching business called Present Moment Coaching. And so I'd love to talk to folks around that too. And yeah, thanks.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on episode 69 with me. This was a great conversation. I really appreciated it. And to everybody else, oh, actually, we're not wrapping up yet. I almost skipped the most important part. So I ask everybody this question. It's like, we're going to jump into a time machine. We're going to go back 10 years. What's that one piece of advice that you would give to yourself?
I have been thinking about this since I know you're going to ask me. And the piece of advice I'd give myself is to know that I'm enough. That deep sense of knowing, regardless of what's happening outside of me, that I'm enough. And I'm just going to bottom line it there. Thanks.
I love that. So to wrap everything up now is what we want for everybody else. Just find one thing to remind yourself that you're enough, because you're full, you're resourceful, and you are creative. All right. So everybody, until next week, I'm Gene, the Enjoyment Coach, and this is LiveCast Conversations with. We'll talk to you then.